Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Well, in today's episode, we're going to sorta quasi-blur that line. Taking place on planet Earth, a Slagathor known as Beth, along with 4 others, all meet up at a casino in China to rage, drink, take random pictures with complete strangers, as you do, and in general, just have a good time. However, someone at some point was infected with a mystery disease that has an extremely quick incubation time as well as high virulence. So quick, in fact, that the next day they are already exhibiting symptoms, but despite this, they go back to their original countries of origins to spread that illness amongst their homeland's people. So in today's episode, we'll be discussing how on point this movie is with reality in a lot of ways, what the virus is, and how it affects the meat suits of those afflicted. Okay, so quick announcement. I was looking through my subscriber thing, and a lot of y'all are watching but not subscribed, so if you like the content and want to be updated, feel free to sub so that you know when I post. And also, I finally got like a real artist to help me with merchandise, so I'm working on that currently. I ran a poll recently, and it seems to be kind of in favor of merchandise, so we'll be doing that. So anyways, moving on. So as per usual, you will see a timestamp up on screen to head to, or use the pretty neato chapters thing in the actual progress bar, but heading to that point, you can bypass a summary of the movie, although I thought it was definitely pretty interesting and worth a watch if you actually haven't seen it. Or hey, maybe you just watch it here, since I'm about to really just spoil the entire thing for you. Also, don't be put off by the Goop Queen here. We won't have to worry about her for too long. So let's get to why we should probably all not board a plane if we are feeling sick, shall we? So we start off our story with coughing. Well, that already lines up. Beth Ermhoff is sitting in an airport looking rather unwell. It's day 2 currently, and she gets a call from John Neal, Mr. Suave over here, who just hooked up with her, and then she bolted. Now, normally that wouldn't be too bad of a thing, but as mentioned previously, Slagathor, it's really the perfect name, has a husband and kids. Nice, Beth. She's touching everything around her and then hands her card off. Across the way, we see a sick man is moving through his town. He's sweating and a little disoriented as he heads home. Meanwhile, back in London, Mrs. Sweats over here drops off a binder full of something, assuring that since she's touched that thing, whatever she has is definitely going to be spreading to that room. As she drives through London, she's looking kind of rough. She gets home and then the maids find her, and starting with the feet, they have turned ashen, showing that poor blood circulation is heading into that area, and her pupils are dilated out as she's foaming for the mouth. Meanwhile, back in the good old US of A, Beth looks on at her Alderson Company packet, having returned back to Minneapolis. She signs some crap and then walks in with her family. She hugs her kid, which, well, he's a goner now. And then, back across the planet again, a businessman heads to Tokyo and is exhibiting much of the same symptoms as everyone else as he works for the same company. As he rides the bus, he's sweating, uncomfortable, and then eventually collapses. While this is going on, the original guy back in China is leaving his complex, likely to go get help. Seeing as he's one giant walking vector, of course he sweatily touches everything and then coughs on children in the elevator. Great times. Eventually, as he's walking through the fish market, he's beginning to have kind of a kaleidoscope vision. This causes him to wander out on the road and then be hit by a truck. On day 3, we jump over to the CDC with, wait, is that Morpheus? It is! Walking up to the visitor section, which, fun fact, everyone can access with a day pass, the real scientists go to another parking garage. Well, I guess actually that's not 100% true. From the front access, it does have some scientists that come through. But anyhow, Morpheus is stopped by a janitor and they talk about his son, and then Morpheus says that he will call someone to check in on his mental state. Out at San Francisco, we come across a man named Alex, who is the first to notice this case. He is currently pitching it to the papers, but they aren't buying it. He mentions how he believes it comes from the fish markets and that obviously they need to pick up the story, to which they decline, and he decides he just needs to put it on his blog. As he threatens the paper, she mentions how they need more information to go off of than just what he's providing, but it's showing already that he's willing to go off very minimal information to jump to conclusions, which historically is a great thing. Meanwhile, Mitch goes to pick up his son Clark at school as he's got a temperature of over 100 degrees and the same cough that his mom has. Oh, by the way, it's near Thanksgiving, so that's not exactly ideal because everybody knows about Black Friday. On day 4, Beth isn't looking wonderful. As she stands there, she begins looking kind of rough and then convulsing on the ground and foaming at the mouth. They think it's a seizure as she's brought in, and then they end up losing her fairly quickly as she begins seizing on the table again. The doctor explains this, but Mitch doesn't look too upset by the news, which is, I don't know if this is acting or what, but they discuss how it's not measles or H1N1, which was the only thing over there, but it does have some of the symptoms of herpes causing encephalitis, which, I mean, wouldn't surprise me with Beth. As Mitch heads home, he gets a call from the babysitter that something is wrong, and then he runs inside the house to find that his son has already flatlined out, a lot like how his mother has, which, man, Mitch is kind of getting screwed by all this. On to day 5 at the WHO, they believe the cases are coming from Hong Kong, to which China begins shutting down at this point and quarantining immediately. They discuss how fast it's happening and possibly where it came from. Meanwhile, Mr. John O'Neill from Chicago flatlines, and then his wife comes out to find that he is a piece of crap. Man, Beth and John really got what was coming to them. During the autopsy of Beth, they find find that her brain has degraded to some degree, more so than what could be considered normal, which would imply that this thing may be attacking neural tissue. And at this point, an infection investigator is called in, which is actually a real thing. People specifically pick to put together how things work and where this might have come from. In this case, it's Dr. Erin Mears. She heads to Minneapolis to begin her investigation. While this is happening, it's determined that Mitch is actually immune from the virus for some reason, and his daughter is freaking out as she would. Back in a meeting, God, I remember these, they discuss how the virus is spreading. They believe it to be respiratory at this point, and also fomite, meaning that surfaces can play a huge role in how this thing spreads, and that the virus must be stable enough to exist in a hostile environment, such as the environment that we live in, for long enough to be transmissible. The WHO is reluctant to react as they scared everyone with the swine flu, their words not mine, and it didn't do much of anything. Interesting to say the least, isn't it? Art and life and all that. Heading over to the BSL-4, and that's where they keep the good stuff, or biosafety level 4 laboratory, which you don't want to be in there unless you really have an interest in the disease you're working on. They begin attempting to grow the virus in various tissues to no avail, as it keeps destroying any cell they put it in. Also, I love how wooden the interaction between the scientists are. Basically, that's spot on. You ever try to talk to a fellow scientist in a lab? It's like pulling teeth. Then again, back when I worked in a lab, I was likely the most sociable. As they discuss how the virus affects the body, they come to the conclusion the body didn't even try to mount an effective resistance to the virus. It truly had no idea what to do with it concerning the virus, which is even more interesting in present times, which we will discuss a little later on. The virus just continued to grow out of control in their meat suits. Alan continues to harass others, and Morpheus is pulled into the Homeland Security office because the feds are a little suspicious that this was a planned event, which is by nature how they are supposed to think. I mean, that's sort of their job, and they connected it to how it is near a holiday at all times. The feds suggest that maybe someone altered bird flu, to which Morpheus says the birds are already altering bird flu. Nobody actually has to do anything. It could still screw us up regardless. Oh, and if you haven't noticed yet, this is like a Contagion movie mystery thing, and not just like some crazy apocalyptic event. Dr. Mears talks to everyone who may have had contact with the infected. They then find out that Beth's driver may have come into contact with her, and he's got the same cough and sweats as everyone else who was infected. A team shows up with masks to cover him up in an attempt to stop it from spreading, but everyone on that bus is probably screwed. Dr. Mears now interviews Mitch and mentions Beth had a layover in Chicago, and was there anyone there that she might have talked to? This kind of rustles the jimmies of Mitch, as he knows John Neal is in Chicago, and she wasn't supposed to be there. After realizing his wife is a piece of trash, he's pretty upset about the whole ordeals, as Dr. Mears just spilled the whole beans about his marriage basically being a sham. Later on, they end up actually discovering where it came from. After modeling how it interacts with both the lungs and brains of people, they showed that it had both pig and bat sequences. Basically, it was picking up keys to different species to interact with their cells, and it was figuring out how human cells work faster than how humans were figuring it out. So it was a novel virus with a mortality rate in the low 20s with no vaccine. And if that doesn't get me the yellow symbol of lameness, I actually don't know what will. So the doctors decide to call all the private run labs and tell them to cook their samples. It's a BSL-4 issue only. And then the doctor, known as Dr. Sussman, who does some sus things, responds with something that is literally the most spot on thing I've ever heard. If you limit this to a BSL-4 government lab, it will take forever to figure out. Yes, it will. You gotta love bureaucracy and protocols. But he doesn't destroy his samples. He keeps on working. On day 8, many cities are actually infected in the US alone. To this, the WHO sends scientists to Hong Kong to determine the origin of the disease. After walking through and looking at all the patients who first dropped, the lines begin forming of how this might be happening. So by day 8, they aren't able to grow the virus as well properly, so they can't test anything on it. And meanwhile, Sun Fang mentions how there's an outbreak in his village, to which the WHO doctor says sorry, but doesn't really seem that sorry. Anyways, back at the private lab, the doctor continues working on the virus sample under the guise that he was going to destroy them. He was able to grow the virus, to which he immediately forwards the data on the MEV1 virus, which is the first step to creating vaccine. On the other side of the planet, Alan is talking to a pharma guy to help get a possible cure. In this case, it's known as Forsythia, which is a plant. Seeing as this thing is kicking off, Dr. Mears requisitions a large facility for triage and treatment. Some random asks, is it coming out of their budget or hers, which is also spot on complaint during a freaking pandemic. People get really upset about budgets. Back at Mitch's house, the paranoia warranted is starting to set in. Andrew comes over to see Mitch's daughter, and he basically sends him packing and doesn't want flowers. And then we get to see what Beth was doing at the casino and who she was interacting with. The WHO doctor is watching footage of who she was with and where she was. The doctor suggests that the virus started in Hong Kong, which they say is just a guess, and it probably didn't. Nobody wants to take the blame for a virus popping up in their country. Art and life, am I right? On day 14, Dr. Mears is boned. She wakes up with a cough very similar to the cough of those infected with MEV1, and she quickly calls around trying to get information on who is around her and if they are infected. As you know, other sicknesses still do exist. She then calls Dr. Cheever and says that she's sick. She discusses her symptoms and he tells her to stay in her room and he's going to try to get her home healthy if he can. Also, Mitch can't get his wife and stepson buried, which is, well, sort of a bummer. But then again, if I couldn't bury my cheating wife and stepson, I mean, I guess that would kind of explain, you know, why he wasn't really too upset about his wife. Anyways, examining the casino footage, it shows that Slagathor is once again calling John Neal and discussing cheating. She leaves her phone behind, and that's how she comes into contact with the girl from England. She then has her drink touched by the waiter from Hong Kong, and that's how he dropped. Then, the Hong Kong scientist working with the WHO doctor says the Americans and French actually have the cure to the virus. They're manufacturing it in secret, but the WHO is actually in cahoots with the Americans, which made me bust out laughing. But it makes the Hong Kong scientist suspicious of the WHO doctor. Also, Forsythia didn't work on Sun Fang's mother, but he suggests it was because she wasn't strong enough, which it just didn't work at all because it's a plant. As they go to leave, they abduct Dr. Lenora, which is the WHO doctor, saying they need to use her for ransom for getting them pushed to the front of the line to get the vaccine. I mean, she could have just resisted at least the smallest amount. Anyway, Sun Fang shows her his village or what's left of it and says she needs to help. Meanwhile, out at the facility, Dr. Mears set up. She's now a patient there and she's not doing too well. At the Department of Homeland Security, they tell Dr. Cheever they can't pick her up as a congressman has priority because, you know, Congress. And then he also goes on to say that they're about to shut down state borders to contain the virus. Dr. Cheever is concerned that this will cause a panic, and he's right, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles on that. He tells Dr. Cheever to keep quiet until they need to tell everyone. During Alan's vlog, he takes Forsythia to see if it combats MEV1. During this, Dr. Cheever calls his wife to say that things are beginning to break down. Nurses are striking because they don't have a way to actually combat the virus, and are really just putting sick people next to healthy people, hoping that the healthy people don't get sick. So really, it's just a skeleton crew of volunteers currently helping out with triage. He then tells his wife that she needs to leave now and don't stop and don't tell anyone. While he did this, the janitor was outside his office and now he knows that the jig is up. It's time to panic. Dr. Cheever's wife then tells her friends, completely violating what Dr. Cheever told her not to do. And then she says that her friend needs to get out of Dodge as well. Basically now it's a giant information leak, pretty standard. So things are getting pretty crazy on day 18. There's a giant run on Forsythia and they can only give out about 50 doses. People start rioting over it and burning stuff down and looting, which is what humans do when they're scared. The individual person isn't so bad, but a group of us, man, we are dumb. Mitch and his daughter try to leave and then head to Wisconsin, but they aren't able to cross the bridge, and that would be my cue to find a side road, if I'm being honest. As Alan walks around the city dropping propaganda, he talks about how his house got broken into for Forsythia, which is ironic considering he started a lot of this panic, or at least helped it. Across the continent, Dr. Mears has officially bitten the dust at this point to the virus as she's buried with the others in a mass grave. Guess she didn't get picked up in time. So now that people are good and scared, an interview was done with Dr. Cheever and Alan for some reason, and as they discuss what's happening and why people shouldn't panic, Alan accuses Dr. Cheever of just being in it for the money and that they are suppressing a cure. Art and life! Dr. Cheever tries to defend himself, but Alan fires back that if it wasn't the case, why did he know something was about to happen but only chose to tell his family about it, which basically destroys Dr. Cheever's credibility and then freaks everyone out even further. Remember, at the end of the day, everyone is human. Because of that, as mentioned by the janitor, we all got people. Most of the institutions in place are just trying to help and make things better, just for your own information. At this point, the virus has mutated into a highly divergent state, which gives them a way to maybe create a vaccine. They go on to discuss the issues they are having. They used the dead virus first and immune boosters, but that yielded no results. Now they have to use a live altered virus to see if that gives them what they need, specifically antibodies to the virus, which the issue is the live virus could revert back to a wild type and body the host as a result, which as you might imagine isn't great. With the updated info, the virus at this point is around 25% to 30% lethality rate, and considering it's projected to basically infect 1 in 12 in the entire world population, with a rate that high, about 145 million people would drop because of the disease. So the entire planet is quarantined at this point, much like how we were back in 2020, and on day 26, things are looking a little dicey. The MREs the military was giving out are running low, and everything is shutting down. Riots are breaking out, more looting, and overrunning the trucks with the food. Again, humans in groups, not too bright. After 2.5 million people in the US dropped, they have now started issuing mandatory curfews. Cops have stopped showing up to work, and as a result, people's houses are getting broken into, and nobody is coming to help. Day 29, Mitch then breaks into a neighbor's house who got bodied a few days earlier and begins stealing food, food because people gotta eat. He goes back inside to look for his daughter and finds that she is hanging out with Andrew during all this crap, which angers Mitch pretty heavily. Kids. They're basically just dumb adults. Disclaimer though, they're not really just like adults. They're actually quite different. Like even pain medication can screw a kid up, but not touch an adult. Anyways, back in the labs, Allie begins discussing how she thinks vaccine 57 may work. Homeland Security wants to put it in the water supply to cure everyone at once, but Allie declines. Instead, she injects herself with the vaccine 57 to test it, see if it works or not. She then visits her dad, who has the virus and is succumbing to disease because she needs an exposure event from him to see if it works. I mean, really, she could have got an exposure event from anybody, but this kind of just ensures she can see her dad. At this point, the vaccine seems effective and she doesn't drop. Now the question is, who gets the vaccine first? Jumping ahead to day 131, society is still crumbling as they ramp up production of this vaccine. Aubrey was attacked by men, not important, and at this point, Alan is discussing making money with the pharma guy about for Cynthia and how the new vaccine will have some side effects in like 10 years or so. Just life, man. I'm telling you, there's so many parallels, but it's a trap. Because of his panic-inducing rants, he has become something of a celebrity and isn't willing to let it go. Homeland Security got involved and nabbed him, though I think he technically still falls under freedom of speech, so not really sure how that's gonna go. On day 133, they now have a lottery system to determine who gets the vaccine based on birthdays on ping pong balls, and Dr. Cheever says Allie needs to actually take credit for her findings, as everyone is pretty jazzed. Mitch's daughter is pretty upset that she's on lockdown for another 144 more days, which I mean, it's kind of just get over it sort of deal. Oh, and by the way, the doctor is still kidnapped. They negotiate a trade for her and soon is given a placebo vaccine for his village in exchange for Dr. Lenora. I feel like she's got some sort of Stockholm syndrome going on, as I'm assuming when she's at the airport and she gets the real vaccine, she then runs back to the village. Alan, at this point, has his blood taken. He lied about being infected with the virus as he has no antibodies to it, and it was all just a hoax. But he made bail regardless, and they let him go for now. Now, I hope I saw this correctly. I believe Dr. Cheever was given vaccines for his wife and himself, but instead he gives one of the vaccines to his wife and then gives the other vaccine to Roger the janitor's son so that they know he will be okay. On day 135, mass vaccination sites begin opening up as humanity begins to get ahead of the virus and slow its spreading. And then Mitch's daughter has her prom with Andrew as Mitch cries over his terrible wife, and then we see where the virus actually came from and who is responsible. Beth's company, Alderson, knocked down some trees which disturbed some bats, who then dropped infected bananas into a pig's cage, which was eaten by the pigs, which resulted in infection. Those pigs were then brought to the casino to be served, where a chef was infected and then held hands with Mitch's wife on day 1. Pandemic started because Beth needed to hold hands with everyone. So, first things first, when examining the outcome of a disease, it's easy to let emotions get in the way of what's happening. I mean, after all, we are human. Seizures, convulsions, sweating, disorientation, all of those are merely symptoms of what your body is currently enduring and attempting to cope with, or in this case, MEV1, but it wasn't really successfully coping with it. It is important to remember that at the end of the day, it's an invasive organism or virus, and what you are experiencing are just the reactions to it being in your body. So with that very obvious statement out of the way, let's take a look at the actual symptoms of MEV1 and try to figure out why the doctor called them herpes at the beginning, because interestingly, cold sores could possibly induce a lot of similar symptoms if you didn't know. When a person was first infected with MEV1, they appear at the beginning to exhibit symptoms of malaise and a cough. Seeing as the virus infects the lung tissue as well as the neural tissue, your body would first and foremost attempt to decrease the viral load by coughing, which is exactly what the virus wants. As the body becomes more and more aware of this invader and the invader in its midst, it will begin activating other immune responses in an effort to counter it. When it does, this results in the high-grade fever in the low 100s as the body is attempting to burn out whatever is infecting the cells. The issue is, however, this will ultimately be fruitless once you start displaying symptoms. By day 2, the cough is getting worse and the fever is depleting your meat suit faster and faster, as well as the virus ransacking you. What was said that is highly interesting is that your body doesn't even know what to do with the virus. While not completely true, it's much more likely related to the incubation period more than anything else, which let's go on to talk about how the innate immune system kind of reacts to virus infections versus the adaptive immune system. When a virus first enters the body and begins infecting cells and replicating, those cells will send out messages to alert the rest of the body that a major bruh moment is currently happening. That's right, I can relate to the youth. These messages are secreted from the cell into the bloodstream and surrounding matrix, and they are known as interferons. This tells your phagocytes that some sort of infection is taking place and help is needed. After picking up this signal, the body's innate immune system is now activated as the phagocytes enter the area where the infection is, and in this case, the viral infection, and then begin scooping up viruses and breaking them down. Now, this is all well and good if it's just kind of your standard infection of viruses. While the flu can in fact be lethal, if it's it's just a minor virus like rhinovirus and you're not immunocompromised, the phagocytes can keep the infection at bay long enough for the adaptive to be activated, which is the real powerhouse of the immune system. The issue with MEV1, however, is that the incubation period is so short, as in like 3 days, that the phagocytes are overwhelmed quickly. Usually with viral infections, the time needed to produce devastating amounts of viruses are roughly about 2 weeks, maybe a little less. And this ensures that at least some antibodies can be produced to the virus in an attempt to subdue it. However, with the MEV1, while the phagocytes may have made it to the thymus to activate the body's stronger defenses, the issue is this takes time to build antibodies. In fact, it actually takes a couple days to properly activate the adaptive immune system. By day 3, MEV1 has already mostly destroyed the body, and not just the respiratory tissues, but something much, much worse. As MEV continues to contend with phagocytes who are quickly being outclassed by the sheer ability of the virus to reproduce in great numbers, they are small enough to bypass the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain itself. And this is where the true lethal nature of the virus actually lies. Heading to the spinal cord, as well as the 3-pound chemoelectric anxiety machine in our skull, inflammation would begin causing the brain to swell, as well as the spinal cord. Now, you might guess that's completely terrible for your life expectancy. There are a few viruses that we know of that can actually cause this to happen, and strangely enough, something as common as the herpes simplex virus 1 is capable of producing encephalopathy. What is encephalopathy? I can already hear you asking. Well, when a virus enters neural tissue, it can cause swelling in that tissue. In fact, specific viruses can cause swelling in certain places, and the herpes in particular can cause swelling in the temporal lobes, and in rare cases can cause swelling in the frontal lobes. Obviously, with those areas afflicted, things like hearing, speech, mood, memory, and logical thought can be heavily damaged. But I think I may have a fair idea on where the MEV1 virus specifically causes encephalopathy. During Beth's autopsy specifically, they discuss how the gyrus of the cerebrum were intact, things looked relatively normal. However, when they got to the lower portions of the brain, that's where they spotted issues. On the lower portions of the brain, you had things like the pons, the hypothalamus, thalamus, pituitary, you know, what have you, all like the really important stuff. But the most critical to our survival as an individual is the brainstem. Here, most of the autonomic functions are housed. Blood pressure, chemoreceptors, breathing rate, heartbeat, all run without a person's conscious effort, except for now because you're manually breathing and also manually blinking. You're welcome for that, by the way. It'll return back to you in a little bit, but it's just slightly annoying for now. Just stop thinking about it. Anyhow, this is what I believe is basically dropping people like flies, or at least the right set of circumstances are dropping people, which we will talk about in a little bit. Shortly after their infections, it's clear the viral load rises quickly. Considering this is a lung and neural tissue disease, it would begin destroying lung tissue, as it's quite virulent, as shown by how much difficulty they had trying to even grow the virus under normal circumstances with standard cells. During the first day, this would induce the coughing that we have seen in the pneumonia creeping in once those cells are destroyed. However, again, as it enters the neural tissue, the virulence doesn't stop there. As neurons were ruptured and the body continued to undergo these virus-driven problems, the brain and spinal cord could swell, leading to the rest of the body suffering. Autonomic functions would begin to cease as consciousness was lost, and eventually a full-blown coma would be entered. Shortly after this, you would likely go into MODS, or multiple organ dysfunction syndrome. Breathing would also cease, and it really may go as far as to stop your heart from beating or cause you to enter an arrhythmia due to pressure on the brainstem. Explaining the symptoms I always feel like is important, because we sometimes view viruses, the actual thing that is causing the infection, as what's tearing our bodies apart, when in fact, in reality, yes, those are doing damages on a cell-by-cell basis, but usually it's our own bodies screwing us through things like inflammation and autoimmune disorders. Now, one thing just for your own reference I did want to clear up is something called the R0 infectivity rate that was discussed in the movie. Now, it's discussed in the movie. I don't really know if I covered it earlier. I don't think I did, but it's basically just a basic reproduction number or reproduction ratio. It can essentially map out things to be vaccinated against and what can be expected if it's allowed to run rampant. So the present IRL disease right now is a 2.5. Typically, if it's under a 1, you may not need to be vaccinated against it. For further reference, the flu is about at a 1, and take something like measles, which is insanely contagious, is like a 12 or 18. It is said that if 10 people stood around somebody with measles, 9 out of 10 of those would become infected, and much like with MEV1, measles can cause encephalopathy, which is why we vaccinate for it. MEV1 is projected to be at a 4, which would put it higher than the current pandemic, and is also capable of having a higher lethality rate, which gives you an idea of why it would be highly necessary to stop it as quickly as possible. So now on to what everyone is interested in. What exactly is up with the immunity of some while others are totally screwed? Well, isn't that the million-dollar question more so in today's day and age? Well, much like how the human immune system is ridiculously complicated, it's way more complicated than I'm about to make it sound. around, but I'll give you a couple of major possibilities based on what we know now that we actually didn't know in 2011. Who did your ancestors screw around with? An interesting question to be sure that nobody really wants to answer, but depending on what that answer is, you might not be full-on Homo sapiens, which might actually be a good thing. Originating out of Africa some time ago, it became apparent that Homo erectus also made their way out of the continent, much like Homo sapiens would kind of a while later. And this shows us a great deal about how our bodies operate in the presence of infectious diseases because of this era. Now, I could write an entire dissertation on this topic because it's so interesting, but essentially the first thing to know about our ancient ancestors is they had a much stronger immune system than us today. And I'm not talking about like back in the Dark Ages, I'm talking back to Homo erectus. When erectus first left Africa, their immunities were quite powerful, and it seems as though they were under a massive amount of selective pressure as they moved into Eurasia. With new diseases that weren't in Africa, but in this new area, came enzymatic activity that would result in less severe reactions to diseases, which became crucial to the survival, as if your body overreacted to them, this would result in your end and then your body not passing along your genes. Over time, Homo erectus would become Homo neanderthalensis, and because of the selective pressures of the diseases sweeping through, their bodies maintained this high enzymatic activity, which resulted in less severe reactions to RNA-based viruses. And this is integral to what is actually happening currently that we see in real life. Like I said, this movie kind of blurs the lines between what is happening in reality and then just being a movie. As Homo sapiens made their way out of Africa sometime later, we didn't evolve under such selective pressures like Neanderthals did. Because of this, our enzymatic activity was much lower, and as a result, we would react more viciously to RNA viral infections, which sounds great in theory, but actually, this would cause us to meet our ends by our own body's responses. And then we started hooking up with Neanderthals. Now, one of the prevailing hypotheses with this type of enzymatic activity is that it's expensive for the body to maintain, and because it's expensive, we never really developed it when we were in Africa. But the Neanderthals had to keep it developed to survive what was in Eurasia. Anyhow, over time, as we banged Neanderthal out of existence, because humans are like that, look no further than Mass Effect, also tally best girl, we picked up something on our 12th chromosome, the ability to react less aggressively towards viral infections. Not all of us have picked this up. People directly out of Africa do not seem to possess this trait as frequently, which may explain why viral infections are more lethal amongst this specific population, because people directly from Africa may not have a direct link to Neanderthal populations. I've had great personal interest in this specific Neanderthal-based immunity system myself because of how I react personally to viruses. I'm a carrier of flu and do not actually show symptoms when I catch it. I also had a confirmed case of Rona this year, but I also suspect I had a case in 2019 based on symptoms. My symptoms were only sweating and a fever for a few hours for about 3 days, and then absolutely nothing. The reason I may have had such mild symptoms in any presence of any virus was, according to my genetic profile that I conducted, I appear to have 60% more DNA from Neanderthal than the average person. And I would go out on a limb to say because of this, likely I possess some sort of inheritance on my 12th chromosome concerning my immune system. Also, I had people ring in one video saying, Roanoke, you can't have 60% DNA from Neanderthals. Are you a biologist XD? Which, like I said, just because you have 60% more isn't saying that you have 60% of your DNA. So 60% more of one is like 2.2, I believe, or maybe it's 2.1. Whereas, 60% of 100 is like 60. So anyways, I'll let you figure out the difference. But because of this resulted in some people contracting the MEV1 virus, but being able to cope better with it. But still, this wouldn't explain why Mitch has an outright immunity to the virus. For this, we have to look at two things in particular: the phagocytic activity and the co-receptors on a cell. What I believe is happening specifically for Mitch and the others who may be immune are that they have some mutation that the virus is not able to link up properly with a co-receptor on a cell to be let in to replicate. While a virus may be present in the body, it is at undetectable levels simply due to the fact that it can't replicate enough because not enough cells are available for that replication process because they do not have the co-receptors to be brought in. I use this example a lot in a lot of my videos, but it's always interesting to me. People from Central Europe actually have a Delta 32 allele mutation because of the bubonic plague. And what happened is that specific receptor is either only growing halfway out of the cell membrane or not at all. Therefore, HIV can't actually attach to that co-receptor to give them HIV infections. So because of that, they actually have a resistance to HIV, and some people have actually shown to be almost outright immune to HIV. But be safe out there because HIV is super mutagenic and it can still infect you. So back to the MEV1. So with this virus floating around attempting to access locked cells, there are cells taking notice of their presence, and these are the phagocytes. They will happen across the virus and say, "Whoa, buddy, what are you doing here?" They They will then engulf it, destroy it, and then take pieces of it to T cells. And from here, they will make the T cells aware, and then the body's aware, and then they start making antibodies, ensuring that the virus can never grow to the point of being out of control, as anything there will be blocked further from accessing cells as antibodies attach to the virus. Now, Mitch may be immune and still have the virus present in his body, but the MEV1 virus isn't an all or nothing deal. The mortality rate is 1 in 12 people, and even just that 1 in 12, it's an actual 25% to 30%, meaning that there are still roughly 548 million people worldwide who would have to contend with the virus attacking their bodies, as they have the co-receptors, but again, they will survive, and you can look no further than the current pandemic to understand what this would look like. We know specific people have more phagocytic activity for some reason that will continue clearing away viruses quickly to stop the viral levels from being completely unchecked. During this time, due to the chromosome 12 inheritance, they will not have as strong of a reaction and may never have the encephalitis as a result, which means their bodies can properly produce antibodies to the MEV1, which ultimately will leave them naturally inoculated. Although I will say this, vaccination would still be worth it, as it's been shown it can help the body produce way more antibodies to an invader than just natural inoculation alone. Ultimately, there are no zombies. There's no crazy alien virus, just the good old-fashioned Nipah virus that infects lung tissue as well as neurons, resulting in encephalopathy. The issue is, however, the virulence was so high that antiviral medications couldn't touch it, and it was also hard to grow. But ultimately, the nuclear option of our body, which is the antibodies, would, as in real life, be the thing that seemingly can fight off anything. And this is why we really need to develop CRISPR more for the future. Imagine being able to aim antibodies at quite literally any disease you want to, rather than just trial and error bodies have to go through now. I feel like we could honestly conquer anything.